Buzz. In the spacious cavern, dense green smoke coiled and swirled. At this moment, the smoke subtly rippled, drawn by an increasingly powerful suction emanating from the depths of the cave. This force rudely pulled the strands of smoke inward, forming a vortex that looked as if it were devouring the green mist. At the vortex's center sat Chen, his figure as still and steady as a boulder. His body had seemingly transformed into a bottomless abyss, endlessly consuming the swirling green smoke into his form. Sizzle. As the green smoke continuously rushed into him, Chen's skin grew increasingly red and hot, eventually reaching a feverish intensity. Suddenly, with a soft hiss, his robes disintegrated into ashes, scattering away. Yet even with his clothing reduced to dust, Chen remained utterly motionless. His face was calm, devoid of any emotional ripples, like an unbroken surface of water. He had fully immersed himself in deep cultivation, his mental state empty. His mind, devoid of distraction, allowed him to entirely forget his surroundings. In this void-like state, images of the Thunder Prison began to dominate his thoughts. Boom. In his consciousness, immense changes unfolded. The landscape of his mind turned into boundless darkness, where furious thunderclaps roared without pause, resonating madly. Crackle. Every now and then, a flash of lightning streaked through the darkness, shattering the stillness with its electric fury. The space reeked of violence, charged with a suffocating and chaotic energy that permeated the endless black void. After countless failed attempts, Chen's visualization of the Thunder Prison had finally started to take shape. Although still incomplete, its embryonic form was gradually manifesting. His task now was clear. He needed to refine and perfect this Thunder Prison. With its structure beginning to solidify, his next crucial step was to visualize bolts of thunder that would temper his mental will within the prison. Guided by this thought, Chen focused his intent. In the pitch-black Thunder Prison, the dark thunderclouds began to swirl and churn frantically. Their rapid motion created friction, generating an ominous sound. Within the depths of the thunderclouds, something mysterious seemed to be brewing, preparing to emerge. Rumble. The thunderous roars grew increasingly violent until, with a sudden deafening crash, the thunderclouds tore apart. From their depths, a towering bolt of thunder shot forth, 10 feet thick and crackling with menace. This thunderbolt was unusually strange. It seemed formless and intangible, yet its presence was tangible and powerful. It coursed through the darkness of the Thunder Prison, unleashing rolling echoes of thunder reverberating in the void. That bolt of thunder was none other than the Netherworld Heart Demon Lightning. On his very first attempt, Chen successfully visualized the Netherworld Heart Demon Lightning. This achievement was largely due to his past experience in refining the actual Netherworld Heart Demon Lightning. The saying, "To draw a tiger, one must first observe one," rang true. It was impossible to recreate something without understanding its form. Similarly, visualizing something as complex and unique as the Netherworld Heart Demon Lightning required both familiarity and experience. Without having witnessed and felt its characteristics, any mental recreation would result in a crude, inaccurate replica that could never truly temper the mental will. However, this single Netherworld Heart Demon Lightning was far from enough to awaken the entire Thunder Prison. For that, Chen needed to visualize more bolts of Netherworld Heart Demon Lightning to fully populate and energize the vast Thunder Prison. With his goal clear, Chen wasted no time. His consciousness dove back into action, focusing on forming further bolts of lightning. The darkness of the Thunder Prison echoed once more with relentless rumbles of thunder. As the clouds clashed and tore against each other, more formless yet potent bolts of thunder began to take shape one by one. Filling the Thunder Prison, however, was no small feat. It was a massive undertaking, one that would demand an enormous amount of time and energy. Thus, Chen fell into a monotonous rhythm, dedicating himself entirely to the painstaking process of visualizing the Netherworld Heart Demon Lightning. He emptied his mind, banishing all stray thoughts. Every ounce of his mental will was singularly focused on creating the Heart Demon Lightning. When his mind grew fatigued, he would enter deep slumber to recover. As soon as his mental will was restored, he would begin again, repeating the arduous cycle without pause. In this blank state of mind, time seemed to lose all meaning. Days, perhaps even months, slipped away unnoticed. Chen had no concept of how long he'd been immersed in this process. All he knew was that he had to persist until the Thunder Prison was fully realized in his mind. Time became irrelevant. Eventually, time felt as though it had completely stopped. Chen had cycled through deep slumber and mental recovery an uncountable number of times. Thousands, perhaps even more. This kind of monotonous visualization would have already driven anyone with a weak willpower to insanity. However, thanks to the years of painstaking cultivation Chen had endured, his efforts were now paying off in the most crucial moment. With his tenacious personality, Chen forced himself to endure the tedium, and his patience was handsomely rewarded. The result of his perseverance was the gradually formidable and increasingly substantial Thunder Prison. Boom! The dark Thunder Prison had grown to an indescribable scale. Within it, thunder clouds surged, an untraceable netherworld heart demon lightning roared through the air. The scene resembled the arrival of doomsday. If such a phenomenon were to manifest in the outside world, it would likely leave no Earth Supreme beneath the heavens daring to venture into it recklessly. Over an indeterminate period of visualization, Chen's Thunder Prison finally took form, revealing its monstrous ferocity and violent temperament. Chen's mental will roamed within the Thunder Prison. He could distinctly sense that with just a thought, the netherworld heart demon lightning within this prison would launch an attack on his mental will, refining him through the method of being tempered through countless trials. This pivotal step in cultivating the 9 Tribulations Thunder Prison visualization technique had finally been accomplished. Yet, the next step would be just as critical. Chen needed to find a way to preserve this Thunder Prison. Otherwise, the moment his mental will withdrew, the Thunder Prison would dissolve automatically. Should he wish to resume his cultivation another time, he would need to recreate the Thunder Prison from scratch. Having experienced the grueling process of creating this Thunder Prison, Chen knew such an undertaking was impossible to repeat every single time. After all, he couldn't afford to exhaust such tremendous amounts of energy and time repeatedly just to recreate the environment. Thus, the next vital task was clear. He needed to solidify this Thunder Prison within his mind. According to the 9 Tribulations Thunder Prison visualization technique, this process was referred to as prison transformation. Fortunately, achieving this step wasn't overly complicated. Since the Thunder Prison was a product of Chen's mental will, it would persist so long as part of his will remained within it. However, Chen's mental will couldn't indefinitely detach from his physical body. Prolonged detachment would lead to the deterioration and eventual death of his mortal form. The most basic method to solve this dilemma was to divide his own mental will, leaving a portion behind to sustain the Thunder Prison's existence. Though a simple approach, the 9 Tribulations Thunder Prison visualization technique offered a far more unique solution, creating a thought seed. This method involved separating nearly half of one's mental will to form a seed that would remain within the Thunder Prison. Typically, such an approach was considered extreme, as reducing one's mental will would inevitably weaken it. To make matters worse, forming the thought seed required sacrificing nearly half of one's mental will, an act that could severely drain one's mental strength. Yet, while extreme, this technique was unrivaled in its brilliance. The thought seed, once left within the Thunder Prison, would undergo perpetual refinement from the relentless tempering of the thunderous energy. This meant that even without Chen's active involvement, the thought seed would grow progressively stronger under the ceaseless trials of the Thunder Prison. In the long run, this was a remarkably profitable investment, albeit one that required immense resolve in the short term. For someone like Chen, resolve was never lacking. Without hesitation, he divided his mental will in two. As he began the process, excruciating pain radiated through his mind like waves, almost causing him to lose control. For a moment, it felt as though the agony would forcibly shatter his focus, expelling his mental will entirely. Fortunately, his unyielding determination allowed him to endure the tearing sensation and avoid wasting all his earlier efforts. Inside the Thunder Prison, the portion of Chen's mental will that had been separated moved into the depths of a thundercloud. There, it began to condense and take root. Boom! Outside the thunderclouds, bolts of thunder radiance struck relentlessly in a rhythmic pattern, each strike landing squarely on the gathered fragment of mental will. Under the repeated bombardments, the fragment gradually compressed and solidified. After countless temperings, it finally morphed into a formless sphere, no larger than a fingertip. The thought seed had taken shape. The remaining portion of Mu Chen's mental will observed the completed thought seed and let out a heavy sigh of relief. He could distinctly feel a unique change in the thunder prison. It no longer seemed as intangible or illusory as before. In Mu Chen's mind, a murmur echoed faintly. After a while, his spirit stirred, and his thoughts began to recede. The empty state of his mind gradually dissipated as well. At the Supreme Sea, where Mu Chen's figure composed of spiritual energy stood, his tightly shut eyes finally, after an unknown amount of time, slowly opened. When they did, the numerous pieces of information he had blocked from his mind previously came flooding in. His mental will once again regained control over his body. A whole month of cultivation. Processing the flood of information, Mu Chen quietly exhaled in relief. In the realm of his thoughts, it had felt like years had passed, but in the outside world, only a month had gone by. Fortunately, this monotonous and arduous effort had reaped significant rewards. He could sense that something intangible had formed within his mind. It wasn't a physical object, but the feeling was extraordinarily fascinating. Mu Chen's perception probed the changes in his mind, and he suddenly let out a surprised sound. His expression turned to one of astonishment as he realized something unexpected. After splitting a substantial portion of his thought power to plant the thought seed within the thunder prison, his current mental will was, astonishingly, even stronger than it had been a month ago. In just a single month, his mental will had advanced tremendously. Hovering above the Supreme Sea, Mu Chen stood midair, his face brimming with surprise and joy. Naturally, his delight arose from the realization of this substantial improvement. Initially, splitting his mental will should have left him extremely weak, but the reality was a pleasant shock. His mental will, instead of being diminished, had grown more potent compared to 1 month earlier. It seems that this month's visualization of the thunder prison has caused my mental will to undergo a significant breakthrough. Mu Chen murmured to himself, a light glinting in his eyes. He was finally beginning to experience the immense benefits of this particular cultivation method. Previously, Mu Chen hadn't been able to intentionally enhance his mental will. It could only grow passively as a result of chance opportunities. Even then, the increases were subtle and required a great deal of accumulation over time for his mental will to merely surpass the average practitioner. But now, after obtaining the 9 Tribulations Thunder Prison visualization technique and practicing it for just a month, the increase in his mental will was equivalent to a year's worth of gains in the past. No wonder it's so difficult for ordinary people to become a battle formation master. Without a technique to cultivate mental will, it's impossible to refine a battle spirit of even a 10,000 rune scale, Mu Chen remarked with a shake of his head. Even with his originally formidable mental will, he had been stuck below 10,000 marks. For others trying to embark on the path of a battle formation master, it would be even more insurmountable. Indeed, the initial threshold for becoming a battle formation master was the toughest obstacle. Now that I've visualized the Thunder Prison, I can count myself as having successfully entered the foundational stage of the 9 Tribulations Thunder Prison visualization technique. From now on, as long as I continue honing my mental will, I should be able to summon a Thunder Tribulation within the Thunder Prison. If I can overcome the first tribulation, my mental will shall soar by leaps and bounds. At that point, a 10,000 rune battle spirit, or even one with 50,000 marks, wouldn't be out of reach. As these thoughts raced through Mu Chen's mind, the prospect filled him with anticipation. A battle spirit with 10,000 marks alone would render him invincible against anyone below the 7th grade supreme. Once his battle spirit exceeded 30,000 marks, even the 7th grade supremes would hesitate to challenge his strength. Of course, Mu Chen also understood that passing the first tribulation of the 9 Tribulations Thunder Prison visualization technique would still require a great deal of effort and preparation. However, considering that he had successfully surpassed the hardest foundational stage, passing the tribulation now seemed more a matter of time and persistence than an impossible challenge. Having truly stepped into the realm of a battle formation master, Chen felt a surging sense of confidence. Not only had he mastered the methods of a battle formation master, but he also possessed the skills of a spiritual array master. These two disciplines, which shared an ancient origin, were complementary in many ways. In fact, during the ancient eras, there were legendary figures known for excelling in both paths simultaneously. Such individuals were dazzlingly exceptional, even in those mythical times. Exhaling deeply, Chen suppressed the waves of excitement coursing through him. He steadied his thoughts and then raised his head, gazing at the supreme sea's sky. There, a black light tower stood silently, its golden flames burning vividly within. These flames continuously purified the streams of green smoke flowing into the tower structure, refining them into torrents of pure spiritual energy that roared downwards like waterfalls. During the span of this month, the Great Pagoda Tower worked tirelessly, refining the spiritual essence within the fallen source pills. Under this tireless refinement, Chen could clearly feel that the spiritual energy within the Supreme Sea had grown significantly more abundant compared to a month ago. The sea's surface level had also risen, making it appear even more vast and boundless. Such dense spiritual energy. I'm not far from breaking through to 5th grade Supreme, Chen thought, his eyes gleaming with determination. The spiritual energy within his Supreme Sea had already reached the pinnacle of 4th grade Supreme, leaving only a single step to cross to achieve the 5th grade Supreme level. However, these 20,000 fallen source pills are nearly exhausted. It seems they won't be enough to complete this final push. Chen's mind raced as he quickly assessed the situation before exiting his cultivation state. Within the mountain cave, where he had remained seated cross-legged without moving for the entire month, his eyes finally opened slowly. At this moment, the once dense green mist filling the cave had become significantly thinner, the result of Chen absorbing and refining it entirely throughout the month. Over this period, the 20,000 fallen source pills had also gradually been consumed by Chen. Observing the thinning mist, Chen contemplated briefly. Then, with a gentle tap on the Qian Kuan bracelet on his wrist, a roaring flood of liquid surged forth, instantly filling the expansive cave. Within the flood were countless droplets of supreme spiritual liquid. Upon a rough glance, their number easily exceeded 100,000. Compared to when he first arrived in the northern domain, Chen's wealth had undoubtedly grown exponentially. Through repeated trials and experiences, his stockpile of supreme spiritual liquid had become substantial. Even though much of it had been consumed during the past year of cultivation, he had carefully preserved this particular reserve for moments like this, when a final push was needed. With these 100,000 drops of supreme spiritual liquid, Chen was confident that this breakthrough would succeed. Boom. Chen's hands formed seals with lightning speed, his mouth opening slightly. Instantly, the torrent of supreme spiritual liquid roared downward, transforming into streams of radiant light that surged into Chen's mouth. Within the Supreme Sea, the sky split open once again. Cascades of torrents descended like waterfalls from the heavens, spanning the sky before pouring entirely into the Great Pagoda Tower. Boom, boom. As the massive spiritual energy derived from the supreme spiritual liquid surged, the refining speed within the Great Pagoda Tower also accelerated. Golden flames roared fiercely, swiftly refining the immense spiritual power, which was then entirely funneled into the Supreme Sea, transforming into Chen's own spiritual energy. Chen watched this scene unfold as he sat cross-legged in midair, forming hand seals and activating the Great Pagoda art. The Great Pagoda Tower began to tremble violently, with golden dragons constantly shooting out from its structure. The entire Supreme Sea quaked and hummed at this moment. On its surface, immense waves of spiritual energy roared wildly, stacking upon each other as they surged higher and higher toward the heavens, appearing as if they were on the verge of breaking through their limits and reaching an even higher realm. This kind of breakthrough scene mirrored the path to strength itself. The path of a true strong cultivator was always fraught with challenges and danger, a relentless climb toward higher levels, fearless of failure. Only through this unyielding pursuit could one rise above the countless beings of the universe and become a true titan of the great thousand world. And so, time continued to flow quietly as Mu Chen focused his mind entirely, refining the fallen source pills and supreme spiritual liquid with all his efforts. Whoosh, whoosh. This once remote mountain range was now filled with the deafening sound of rushing winds. Numerous figures shot up into the sky, streaking rapidly toward a distant location. At the same time, an equal number of figures approached from the distance, their movements carrying an undercurrent of oppressive killing intent. This mountain range was the resting and regrouping site for the Great Luo Heavenly Domains contingent, which included Mu Chen and his comrades. However, it was unlikely that even Nine Nether had predicted that Mu Chen's cultivation would extend for a full month. During this period, the others had remained here to guard Mu Chen, ensuring his cultivation was uninterrupted and free from mishaps. Fortunately, after their journey to the Death Ruins, the fallen source pills they had gathered were sufficient to complete their assigned tasks. Thus, waiting a month did not significantly impact their objectives. While keeping an ear to the ground for information coming from the fallen battlefield, Nine Nether and her companions could sense that the brutal nature of the grand hunting war was gradually becoming more apparent with each passing moment. In just a month's time, countless vicious battles had erupted across the fallen battlefield. The weaker forces either met with complete annihilation or, after suffering devastating casualties, were forced to withdraw from this merciless region. Even some renowned first-rate factions had no choice but to retreat in defeat, bearing the heavy cost of their losses. Of course, as the grand hunting war heated up further, even among the top-tier forces, the tension intensified, turning into open friction with sparks flying everywhere. It was as though everyone could faintly sense that the grand hunting war was approaching its most frenzied and dangerous stage. At that point, even the most powerful factions would face the grim prospect of total obliteration. Upon a mountain peak, Nine Nether's slender, graceful figure stood tall against the wind. Her bright, observant eyes were fixed on a distant mountain where a sealed cave lay, the place where Mu Chen was undergoing his cultivation. Ever since Mu Chen had entered that cave, there had been no activity from within for nearly a month. If it weren't for the faint spiritual energy fluctuations they could sense coming from the cave, they might have suspected that something had gone awry with his cultivation. A single month's time wasn't short, especially during the Grand Hunting War. If not for the significant gains they had made earlier in the Death Ruins, this month of waiting might have left them completely lagging behind in this highly competitive race. Suddenly, the sound of rushing wind broke the silence. A few figures flashed into view beside Nine Nether. It was none other than Mountain Splitting King and his group. They cast a glance toward the sealed cave where Mu Chen was cultivating and frowned. "Still no signs of Mu King coming out of seclusion?" asked Mountain Splitting King in a low voice, his brows furrowed. Nine Nether shook her delicate head lightly and let out a quiet, resigned laugh. Clearly, Mu Chen's extended period of cultivation had taken them by surprise. "Haha. Spending this much time cultivating must mean Mu King has made significant progress. It seems his strength will soar to new heights when he comes out," Blood Eagle King remarked with a casual chuckle, his tone lighthearted. "Though this month hasn't brought us any major gains, it's given us time to rest and recover. We've also managed to avoid the current madness haunting the fallen battlefield. Otherwise, running into the fearsome Divine Hall at this time would have been disastrous," Spirit Sword King added with a nod. At the mention of Divine Hall, the expressions of Nine Nether and her companions turned grave. Just half a month ago, a shocking battle had erupted between the Divine Hall and another top-tier faction, the 10,000 Saints Mountain, for control over a relic containing fallen source pills. Unsurprisingly, tempers flared, and the two sides clashed fiercely. The outcome, however, left many utterly stunned. The Divine Hall's Zhan Tai Lu Li defeated the battle-will genius of the 10,000 Saints Mountain, severely injuring him in the process. His elite troops suffered heavy losses, and even a 6th-grade supreme-level expert of the 10,000 Saints Mountain fell during the battle. The 10,000 Saints Mountain was dealt a crushing blow, their defeat nothing short of catastrophic. This battle solidified Zhan Tai Lu Li's rising reputation. Her brilliance overshadowed even someone like Fang Yi, a former dominant figure of the Dragon and Phoenix record. She must have become a battle formation master, Nine Nether said gravely. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for her to easily defeat a battle-will genius like that. Mountain-Splitting King's expression grew tense as well. Facing a battle formation master commanding a well-trained army was a daunting prospect, no matter how close he was to the peak of 6th grade supreme strength. It's said that Fang Yi has been searching for our whereabouts recently, likely plotting his revenge. Lying low for now is the wisest course of action, Nine Nether said softly. As soon as Mu Chen emerges from seclusion, we can set out and rendezvous with the others from the Great Luo Heaven Domain to await orders from the Domain Lord. Mountain-Splitting King and the others nodded in agreement. Divine Hall's momentum was only growing stronger, and with someone as formidable as Zhantai Lu Li becoming a battle formation master, any plans to contest them could only wait until Mu Chen rejoined them. Without him, they lacked the manpower to fend off Fang Yi's forces. Boom. Just as these thoughts swirled in their minds, the earth beneath their feet suddenly trembled faintly, drawing startled expressions from Nine Nether and her companions. Their gazes immediately snapped toward the sealed cave, their eyes lighting up with surprise and joy. From within the mountain cave, an intense surge of spiritual energy erupted like a volcano, shaking the surroundings. This powerful spiritual energy wave could only belong to Mu Chen. In the once desolate mountain range, a massive tremor now rumbled through the land. The source of this immense quake was, naturally, the colossal battle-intent giant hand that loomed 1,000 feet large in the sky above. That hand, as though it had traversed through space and time from a primordial era, was imbued with ancient battle runes. Waves of terrifying battle intent rippled outward from it, causing the surrounding space to quake violently. Even an expert as powerful as the Mountain-Splitting King couldn't help but narrow his pupils at the sight of that rune-covered giant hand, his expression turning exceptionally grave. He could feel the overwhelming power radiating from the hand, power so formidable that it made his heart tremble. If he had to face such an attack directly, he wasn't confident in his ability to withstand it. If even the Mountain-Splitting King was so shaken, there was no need to mention others like the Blood Eagle King. Their strength was a notch below the Mountain-Splitting King's, so the dangerous aura of the battle-intent giant hand struck an even deeper fear into their hearts. This is the power of a battle formation master? Truly terrifying, said Nine Nether, her delicate face taut with solemnity. It was now clear why Zhantai Lu Li had been able to lead the Divine Hall to defeat the equally powerful 10,000 Saints Mountain. The strength a true battle formation master could unleash far exceeded that of a so-called battle-will genius. From their perspective, it was apparent that the current battle-intent giant hand unleashed by Mu Chen was countless times stronger than what he had summoned a month ago. The gap was so vast, it was like comparing two entities from completely different realms. Overhead, Mu Chen gazed at the battle-intent giant hand. With a wave of his sleeve, the enormous hand dissolved into scattered light. The vast and oppressive battle intent that had filled the horizon gradually dissipated, eventually streaming back into the 5 armies below. While the battle intent subsided, Mu Chen's heart still subtly trembled. As the Mountain-Splitting King and others marveled at the power of a battle formation master, Mu Chen himself was equally astonished. He now understood profoundly the terrifying gap between possessing 10,000 battle marks and merely 9,000. The seemingly small difference of 1,000 marks had transformed into a qualitative leap, placing the two on completely different levels. If the current him faced his former self from a month ago, he was confident he could eliminate his past self with a mere gesture. The leap from 9,000 battle marks to 10,000 battle marks was not merely an increase in quantity, it was a transformation in essence. Mu Chen now felt absolute confidence. With the power of a 10,000 runes battle array master, he feared no opponent within the 6th grade Earth Supreme Realm. The vocation of the battle formation master was truly extraordinary. Its unique path made it radiantly distinct. In some ways, it was not inferior to the path of spiritual power cultivation. The difference lay in their essence. Spiritual power cultivators refined themselves, amassing godlike power within, while battle formation masters borrowed the strength of armies, using numbers to compensate for quality. Neither path was inherently superior nor inferior. They simply diverged in their methods. However, the one flaw of the battle formation master might be their dependence on armies to harness their full strength. Without an army to rally their battle intent, even the most formidable battle formation master would be rendered powerless. By contrast, spiritual power cultivators relied on their own strength, capable of wielding heaven-shaking power with just their bare hands. Both paths had their respective strengths. After all, any cultivation method that had withstood the passage of countless millennia must have its merits. Gradually, the turbulence in Mu Chen's heart began to settle. Slowly, his figure descended from the sky. Haha, congratulations, King Mu. From today onward, the great Luo Heaven Domain finally has a genuine battle formation master in its ranks. In this grand hunting war, King Mu will undoubtedly shine, the mountain-splitting king and others said with hearty smiles. Along with their congratulations, there was now a distinct trace of respect in their tone. In this world where power commanded reverence, the might Mu Chen had displayed struck fear into their hearts. At this moment, his youthful age had become entirely irrelevant. Mu Chen smiled in response, cupping his fists humbly. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, he inquired about the events in the grand hunting war over the past month. Has Zhang Lu Li truly become a battle formation master? Mu Chen wasn't particularly surprised after hearing what Nine Nether and the others had said. After all, Zhang Lu Li's inheritance was far more complete than his. While the Heavenly Formation Emperor might not carry the same renown as the creator of the Nine Tribulations Thunder Prison visualization technique, the fact remained that the version Mu Chen had obtained was incomplete. He had to figure out many aspects on his own. In contrast, Zhang Lu Li had a mentor who paved the way for her, allowing her a much faster progression. It wasn't unexpected. Zhang Lu Li's name now resonates throughout the fallen battlefield. I think after this grand hunting war, she'll undoubtedly become a renowned figure in the northern domain, Nine Nether remarked with a sigh. Faced with a 10,000 runes battle array master, even someone like them, holding the rank of 6th grade supreme, would feel an immense sense of dread. It's said that the top-tier factions have been provoked by this and are now scouring the fallen battlefield for ruins related to battle formation masters, striving to uncover some kind of inheritance. They're doing their utmost to cultivate their own battle geniuses into battle formation masters, the mountain-splitting king added. Mu Chen nodded. In a war of this scale, the influence a battle formation master could wield was unquestionably significant. Naturally, such top-tier forces would do whatever it took to secure one for themselves. What's the result of their search? Mu Chen inquired. The fallen battlefield was incredibly vast, and they had only scratched the surface so far. It was inevitable that others besides the Heavenly Formation Emperor had also perished here. As such, there were likely more ruins left behind by other fallen battle formation masters. With the frantic efforts of these top-tier forces, they've naturally found a few things, though we've yet to determine the authenticity of the reports we've received, said Nine Nether after a moment of thought. However, some time ago, there was intelligence that suggested the Netherworld Palace had clashed with the group from the Divine Hall that Zhang Lu Li was part of. The conflict ended in a stalemate. Oh, Mu Chen's eyes narrowed slightly. The fact that the Netherworld Palace forces could hold their own against Zhang Lu Li's group was surprising. Could it be that the Netherworld Palace had produced their own battle formation master? We suspect the Netherworld Palace also discovered a ruin left by a battle formation master and obtained an inheritance. Through this, they may have trained one of their battle geniuses into a battle formation master, Nine Nether said with a serious expression. Mu Chen nodded slightly. That explanation seemed logical. Yet, it made him sigh at how rapidly the dynamics of the fallen battlefield had shifted in just a single month. Not long ago, there hadn't been any battle formation masters, but now they were emerging like an unending spring. The fallen battlefield, despite its immense dangers, clearly held countless opportunities for meteoric rises in power and status. However, for the great Luo Heaven Domain, the Netherworld Palace was hardly a friendly faction. To Mu Chen, their conflicts with the Divine Hall were no more than mutual destruction, something he was all too happy to witness. Also, during that clash, it seems the Divine Hall's Fong, he was defeated by the Netherworld Prince from the Netherworld Palace. 9 Nether added after some hesitation. Chen froze for a moment at her words. Then, with a hint of surprise, he asked, "The Netherworld Prince has advanced so quickly?" The last time they'd fought in Dragon Phoenix Heaven, the Netherworld Prince had clearly been weaker than Fong Yi by a margin. Now, less than half a year later, it seemed the tables had turned dramatically. When Chen had last faced Fong Yi, the latter had already reached the level of a 5th-grade supreme. If the Netherworld Prince managed to surpass him, then it was clear that he too had ascended to that rank. These individuals, not a single one of them could be underestimated. Chen sighed softly, then turned to the mountain-splitting king and the others. "What should we do next? Right now, we've secured enough fallen source pills to complete our current task. I think we should regroup with the other kings as soon as possible. If we delay, unexpected developments could arise," the mountain-splitting king suggested with a solemn expression. The situation within the fallen battlefield was growing ever more perilous. Even a top-tier faction like the 10,000 Saints Mountain had suffered devastating losses, including the fall of a 6th-grade supreme. In light of this escalation, regrouping with the rest of the kings would lower the probability of being ambushed by any other major factions. Chen nodded. The kings of the Great Luo Heaven Domain had initially scattered across the fallen battlefield to search for ruins and refine fallen source pills. His own group had gathered earlier than planned only because of the spirit-seeking compass, which allowed them to locate relics efficiently. The remaining kings were likely still operating independently. At this stage in the evolving fallen battlefield war, continuing to act alone was clearly too dangerous. At that point, if they were to be surrounded, not only would the hard-earned fallen source pills be completely lost, but there would also likely be heavy casualties. After all, during such chaotic times, being a solitary force made one extraordinarily vulnerable to danger. Hearing this, Chen and the others nodded slightly. The most critical matter at hand was indeed to regroup. Once they had gathered together, they could wait for Mandala's instructions. If she could locate the Earth's supreme treasure, they could then mobilize their entire forces as one. "Let's move." Everyone present was decisive and resolute. Once the decision was made, there was no hesitation whatsoever. With a flick of their sleeves, orders were swiftly given. In an instant, the mountain range resounded with a thunderous rumble. Countless figures rose into the air, transforming into streaks of light that covered the sky, sweeping across the heavens before quickly disappearing at the horizon. As Chen and his forces set off for the rendezvous point in the Great Luo Heaven Domain, far to the north, atop a distant peak, 2 figures stood. One of them was none other than the Netherworld Palace's Netherworld Prince. Beside him stood a figure draped in a black robe, silently positioned like a shadow. Swoosh! From behind came the sound of rushing wind. A figure approached rapidly and landed beside the Netherworld Prince, respectfully presenting a scroll with both hands. The Netherworld Prince received it with a detached expression, unfurling the scroll as his eyes flickered faintly. After a few moments, a faint smile emerged. He turned to the black-robed man beside him and said, "The rats who've been hiding for a month have finally surfaced." The black-robed man's eyes gleamed with an eerie light at these words. He nodded lightly, and a harsh, raspy voice emerged from his throat. "Once I've absorbed his mental power, Zhantai Lu Li will be next." Within the fallen battlefield, enveloped by storms of spiritual energy, a brutal war continued relentlessly. Factions fiercely contested the fallen source pills and other legacies. Such battles were so savage that even some first-tier forces began to struggle with the costs and were ultimately forced to withdraw in dismay. Of course, by this stage of the Grand Hunting War, retreating was by no means an easy option. Many factions that attempted to withdraw and preserve their strength were instead ambushed, their top experts entirely eliminated. The scattered remnants of these groups, even if they managed to escape, were unable to rebuild their factions. Such forces, once well-regarded in the Northern Domain, ultimately faded into obscurity, their former fame becoming no more than fleeting whispers of the past. This was the nature of the Grand Hunting War. There were no eternal hunters, as no one could predict when the hunter would become the hunted. Amid this cruel and oppressive atmosphere, Chen led the vast forces of the Great Luo Heaven Domain away from their secluded refuge, heading straight for the gathering point of the domain's kings. Their contingent was fortified and imposing, bolstered by the commotion they had stirred within the death ruins not long before. Thus, when Mu Chen and his forces appeared, they immediately drew the attention of various factions. In the past month, Zhantai Lu Li had been the most prominent figure in the fallen battlefield. However, rumors from the death ruins suggested that even Zhantai Lu Li had suffered heavily at Mu Chen's hands. Consequently, in the eyes of many, Mu Chen was an even greater menace. His arrival naturally warranted increased vigilance. Mu Chen's forces, however, paid no heed to this scrutiny. They pushed their pace to the maximum, not halting even once along the way. Moreover, given Mu Chen's fearsome reputation and the strength of their group, no factions foolishly attempted to provoke them. With their relentless advance, it took Mu Chen and his forces less than 4 days to traverse nearly half of the fallen battlefield. Gradually, they reached the inner region of the battlefield. This area was even more perilous than before, as only factions with genuine strength, those that could at least be considered first-tier forces in the northern domain, dared to venture here. Although the number of battles here seemed fewer, every conflict that did occur was nothing short of catastrophic, shaking the heavens and earth itself. Upon arriving in this vast and treacherous region, even Mu Chen's group slowed their pace and heightened their vigilance, wary of falling into an ambush by other factions. The land in the inner region of the fallen battlefield was dark and oppressive, a shadowy hue that weighed heavily on the mind. The ground was scarred with horrifying chasms, which snaked across the terrain like bottomless abysses. These are remnants from that ancient war. Swish! On the black plains, a cacophony of rushing wind echoed far and wide. Overwhelming beams of light swept across the sky, carrying a dreadful sense of oppression that rippled through the air and caused the heavens and earth to tremble faintly. At the forefront of this contingent stood Mu Chen, his eyes slightly narrowed as he surveyed the surroundings. He then turned his head to glance at Nine Nether, asking, "How much longer until we reach the rendezvous point?" "At our current pace, we should arrive in 2 days," Nine Nether replied. 2 days, huh? Mu Chen pondered briefly, then nodded and instructed, "Everyone stay on high alert, especially with regard to watching out for the Netherworld Palace." Nine Nether was slightly taken aback, but also nodded in agreement. Recently, they had received intel indicating that the Netherworld Palace seemed particularly interested in their group. At the time, the distance had been significant enough that it was no cause for concern, but now that they were entering the inner region of the fallen battlefield, heightened vigilance was necessary. The Netherworld Palace has been unusually active and aggressive lately. What strange is their choice of targets? Leaders gifted with battle-will talents, Mu Chen said, frowning. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The way the Netherworld Palace was operating seemed calculated and intentional. However, for now, he couldn't deduce why the Netherworld Palace would specifically target leaders with battle-will talents. Suppressing his thoughts, Mu Chen waved his hand to signal the group to continue forward. Just as they prepared to move again, Mu Chen, Mountain-Splitting King, Nine Nether, and the others suddenly tensed. With a wave of his hand, the troops behind him instantly assumed a guarded formation. Their gazes turned toward the sky on the right, where another massive force was surging through the heavens. When this formidable group spotted Mu Chen and his contingent, they briefly froze before their pace slowed, signaling caution on their part as well. "Those are forces from the Demon Gate," Nine Nether remarked sharply, her discerning eyes catching sight of the distinctive emblems adorning the garments of the opposing army. "Oh." Mu Chen and his group's expressions shifted subtly as they grew more wary. The Demon Gate was another top-tier power in the northern domain, and this force exuded overwhelming strength. Should conflict arise, it would undoubtedly result in a tremendous battle. "Don't initiate any hostilities," Mu Chen ordered. Truth be told, he preferred not to make enemies of the Demon Gate. The Great Luo Heaven Domain didn't have much enmity with them, and they had already provoked Divine Hall, the Netherworld Palace, and the Shantian Palace. Further antagonizing the Demon Gate would be unwise. Noticing that Mu Chen's side showed no signs of aggression, the Demon Gate's forces also relaxed slightly. Soon after, a graceful figure emerged, appearing in front of the Great Luo Heaven Domain's troops. The figure stepped forward, revealing a stunningly beautiful woman in a red dress. The dress accentuated her enchanting curves, and her peach blossom-like face framed an aura of seductive charm. This absolute beauty was familiar to Mu Chen. She was none other than Hong Yu of the Demon Gate, whom he had previously encountered at the Dragon Phoenix Heaven. "Is Brother Mu present?" Hong Yu asked softly, her voice so sweet and gentle it almost made the bones of her audience ache. Hearing Hong Yu explicitly ask for him by name, Mu Chen was momentarily surprised. Off to the side, Mountain Splitting King and others exchanged knowing smirks, their expressions brimming with amusement only men could understand. Mu Chen cast them a helpless glance, and then stepped forward with a faint smile. "I am Mu Chen. May I ask why Miss Hong Yu has brought so many powerful figures from the Demon Gate?" Hong Yu's enchanting eyes brightened slightly when she saw Mu Chen. She offered a bitter smile and said, "This was purely a chance encounter, but I do have a favor to ask of Brother Mu." "Oh." Mu Chen arched a brow. "2 days ago, we clashed with the Netherworld Palace," Hong Yu said, her delicate face growing serious. Mu Chen's eyes narrowed. The Netherworld Palace's frequent movements had drawn his attention of late, especially since their interests seemed to extend to him as well. "Our Demon Gate also has a battle-will genius. However, during the clash 2 days ago, he was defeated by the Netherworld Palace's Lin Ming." Hong Yu continued, her tone filling with unease. "What's odd is that after losing to Lin Ming, our battle-will genius fell into a deep coma. Despite trying every method we could think of, we've been unable to wake him." Mu Chen's eyelid twitched slightly. Brother Mu is also a battle-will genius, and it's said that he displayed extraordinary prowess within the Death Ruins. I imagine he must have become a battle formation master by now. So we were hoping Brother Mu could help us at the Demon Gate by examining this individual to see if there's any way to awaken them, Hong Yu said earnestly, her tone filled with humility. Mu Chen merely smiled and did not respond directly. Instead, he said with a calm demeanor, "Miss Hong Yu, in this grand hunting war, calculations and scheming between parties are unavoidable, as you surely know. If I were to help awaken this battle-will genius for you, wouldn't that potentially create future troubles for the great Luo Heaven Domain?" Hong Yu slightly tilted her alluring face, her expression growing serious. "But isn't it always better to have one more friend than an enemy? The Demon Gate has been plotted against by the Netherworld Palace, and we are certainly determined to settle that score. From what I've heard, the Netherworld Palace has also been searching for your whereabouts with questionable intentions. In this regard, we do share a common enemy, don't we? Furthermore, Lin Ming of the Netherworld Palace has explicitly stated his intent to deal with you. You don't know what kind of methods he possesses, but perhaps by examining this injured battle-will genius, you might glean some insight into Lin Ming's tactics and be better prepared. Besides," Hong Yu added with a sly smile, "with Brother Mu's current strength, a mere battle-will genius shouldn't pose any real threat to you, should they?" Even with Mu Chen's composed temperament, he couldn't help but inwardly praise Hong Yu for her cleverness. Her words had struck precisely at the concerns in his heart, while also aligning with the mutual interests of both parties. She had made it nearly impossible for him to refuse. Though Mu Chen understood that in the Grand Hunting War there were no absolute allies, easing relations with the Demon Gate could indeed be beneficial to the great Luo Heaven Domain. "Very well. Bring the person here," Mu Chen said. Naturally, he wasn't foolish enough to venture alone into the enemy's army. Hong Yu, knowing full well that Mu Chen would never agree to go himself, responded with a graceful wave of her delicate hand. Several figures immediately burst forth from the rear of her army, carrying a wooden stretcher. On the stretcher lay a pale-faced man with his eyes tightly shut. Mu Chen's gaze fell on the unconscious man, his brow furrowing slightly. Behind him, Nine Nether and the Mountain Splitting King approached swiftly. The latter asked in a low voice, "What's the situation?" This person's spiritual energy doesn't seem disturbed at all. Mu Chen nodded slightly, his gaze contemplative. After a moment's hesitation, he extended 2 fingers and gently placed them on the unconscious man's forehead. A brief moment later, Mu Chen's pupils suddenly shrank, and a sharp glint flashed in his eyes. "Brother Mu, how is he?" Hong Yu asked anxiously as she observed his reaction. Mu Chen slowly withdrew his fingers, his expression turning grave. After a moment of silence, he said solemnly, "His mental will is entirely destroyed. From this point onward, he will never be able to command battle will again." As he spoke these words, Mu Chun felt a wave of unease ripple through his heart. Lin Ming of the Netherworld Palace had used such a domineering and sinister method, completely annihilating someone's mental will. As a battle formation master, Mu Chun understood the magnitude of this act. This battle will genius from the Demon Gate had been utterly and irreversibly ruined. Lin Ming,